First, let me create a detailed outline for this story about finding parents locked outside while in-laws party inside. Introduce main character, Catherine Kate, finding her parents locked outside in freezing weather. Brief mention of in-laws partying inside while ignoring the situation. Hint at the severe disrespect and cruelty of this action. Mention of deciding to make them pay for their behavior. Create emotional connection by conveying shock and protective instinct. End with call to action, asking viewers where they're watching from, requesting likes and subscribes, mentioning family betrayal, Kate's background and close relationship with her parents, meeting her husband Michael and their connection, first meeting with Michael's wealthy, status-conscious family, early warning signs of in-laws' coldness toward her parents, the wedding where class differences became apparent, moving to the same city as both families, initial attempts to bridge the gap between the families, her parents' generous and welcoming nature despite differences, Michael's position caught between families, Kate's pregnancy and early hopes for family harmony, first Christmas together and tensions beneath the surface, Kate's belief that having a baby would bring everyone together, baby Emma's birth and initial happiness, first family gathering with baby, subtle slights toward Kate's parents, in-laws taking over nursery decoration without consultation, exclusion of Kate's parents from key baby events, Michael's reluctance to address the situation, growing tension between Kate and her in-laws, the first holiday dinner disaster, Kate's mother being reduced to tears, Kate's confrontation with mother-in-law, Eleanor, Michael taking his mother's side, Kate's growing resentment and protection of her parents, attempts to maintain relationships despite tensions, the planning of Emma's first birthday party, in-laws insisting on hosting at their mansion, Kate's reluctant agreement with conditions for her parents' inclusion, the day before Emma's birthday party, Kate's final preparations and instructions to include her parents, Michael's assurances that everything will go smoothly, Kate being called to emergency work situation, leaving Emma with Michael at his parents' house, unexpected snowstorm developing while Kate is working, difficulty getting back due to weather, worried calls to Michael going unanswered, Kate's growing anxiety about her parents in the storm, finally reaching the in-laws' neighborhood, seeing her parents' car covered in snow in the driveway, first suspicions that something is wrong, the approaching sounds of music and laughter from inside, Kate's mounting dread as she approaches the house, finding parents huddled by side door, shivering with blue lips, their explanation of arriving on time but being told to wait, in-laws forgetting them outside for over an hour in freezing weather, Kate's shock and immediate care for her parents, bringing them to her car to warm up, entering the house to find party in full swing, the confrontation with in-laws in front of guests, mother-in-law Eleanor's dismissive attitude, father-in-law Richard's cold justification, Michael's weak attempt to mediate, Kate's realization about the deliberate cruelty, the moment of clarity about her in-laws' true nature, taking Emma and leaving with her parents, Michael's choice to stay with his family, Kate's determination that this cruelty would not stand, the drive home with her parents and Emma, the moment Kate decides on a plan for consequences, caring for her parents after their exposure to cold, her father's mild hypothermia requiring medical attention, Kate documenting everything with photos and medical reports, Michael's late-night arrival and weak excuses, Kate's calm but firm confrontation with Michael, his revelation that his parents had planned the exclusion, Kate's ultimatum choose which family he truly supports, Michael's continuing attempts to minimize the situation, Kate's systematic response plan taking shape, contacting family members who witnessed the incident, gathering statements from shocked party guests, consulting a lawyer about elder abuse possibilities, using Michael's recorded admission against his parents, the social consequences beginning as story spreads, Eleanor's charity board position becoming threatened, Richard's business associates hearing about the incident, the in-laws' desperate attempts to contain the damage, Kate's refusal to accept hollow apologies or excuses, setting clear boundaries for future family interactions, family meeting called by Michael 1 week later, the in-laws' attempts to downplay what happened, Kate's presentation of evidence and witnesses, Michael finally standing up to his parents, Eleanor's tearful non-apology focusing on her embarrassment, Richard's anger turning to concern about reputation, Kate's parents' dignified response to the situation, Michael's realization of his enabling behavior, the agreement for supervised visits with Emma only, in-laws' social circle's reaction to the incident, the consequences for Eleanor's charity position, Richard facing questions at his country club, Kate and Michael's relationship strain and counselling, the slow rebuilding of trust between them, Michael's growing relationship with Kate's parents, holiday arrangements excluding the in-laws, Emma's second birthday planned at Kate's parents' modest home, the in-laws' gifts returned unopened, Kate's establishment of firm boundaries moving forward, Michael's difficult journey to understand family loyalty, 1 year after the incident, the changes in family dynamics, in-laws' genuine attempts at redemption, Kate's careful monitoring of their behaviour, Michael's transformed relationship with Kate's parents, Emma's growing bond with all grandparents, the first tentative holiday gathering with both families, Eleanor's genuine apology to Kate's parents, Richard's acknowledgement of his prejudice. The incident becoming a turning point for both families, Kate's reflections on standing up for what's right, the importance of protecting vulnerable family members, lessons about privilege and respect, new family traditions that honour both sides, Kate's parents' resilience and forgiveness, the unexpected positive outcomes of the confrontation, Michael's growth as husband, father and son, Kate's strengthened relationship with her parents, the birth of their second child bringing renewed hope, final thoughts on family loyalty and consequences, call to action for viewers to share their stories and support each other, encouragement for those dealing with difficult in-laws. Now I'll write the complete story based on this outline. My name is Catherine. I'm 32 and I never imagined I'd find my parents trembling with blue lips outside my in-laws' mansion while a party raged inside. The sight of my father supporting my mother, both nearly frozen after being forgotten in the snow for over an hour, changed something fundamental in me. While my husband Michael made excuses, I made a decision. Nobody treats my family like they're disposable, especially not people who claim to be family themselves. The revenge I orchestrated wasn't just swift, it was devastatingly effective. Where are you watching from today? Hit like and subscribe. If you've ever had to stand up against family cruelty because sometimes protecting your loved ones means drawing a line that can never be crossed again. I grew up in a modest neighborhood in Minneapolis, the only child of Robert and Mary Collins. My father worked as a high school science teacher, and my mother ran a small bakery from our home kitchen. We weren't wealthy by any means, but I never felt like I was missing anything. Our home was filled with laughter, encouragement, and unconditional love. It's not what you have that matters, Katie, my mother would say. It's who you have beside you when times get tough. This philosophy shaped my childhood and my values. My parents attended every school play, celebrated every small achievement, and taught me that kindness and integrity mattered more than status or possessions. They worked extra jobs to send me to college where I studied nursing and eventually specialized in pediatric care. It was during my residency at Minneapolis General Hospital that I met Michael Whitman. He was completing his surgical residency and we connected during a particularly difficult case involving a 6-year-old with a rare heart condition. I was struck by Michael's compassion with the child's worried parents and his brilliant, steady hands during the 12-hour surgery that saved the boy's life. Want to grab some terrible cafeteria coffee? He asked afterward, his blue eyes tired but warm. I think we both earned it. One coffee led to dinner the following weekend, which led to 6 months of dating that felt like floating through a dream. Michael was everything I'd hoped to find: intelligent, kind, funny, and seemingly humble despite his privileged background. It wasn't until I was introduced to his family that I glimpsed a potential complication in our relationship. The Whitmans lived in Kenwood, Minneapolis's most exclusive neighborhood in a sprawling colonial mansion set on manicured grounds. Richard Whitman had built a medical technology company from the ground up, selling it for hundreds of millions when Michael was in college. Eleanor Whitman came from old money and served on the boards of the city's most prestigious cultural institutions. Our first dinner at the Whitman home was an exercise in subtle discomfort. Eleanor examined me like a specimen under glass, asking pointed questions about my people and where I had summered growing up. I answered honestly about my middle-class upbringing, my father the teacher and my mother the home baker, watching Eleanor's smile tighten incrementally with each response. "How quaint," she said finally, exchanging a look with Richard that I couldn't quite interpret. Michael seemed oblivious to the undercurrents, squeezing my hand under the table and smiling proudly. "Kate graduated top of her class, but," he offered, "she's the most requested pediatric nurse in the hospital. Nursing is certainly a respectable profession," Richard allowed in a tone that suggested it was anything but. Despite this rocky introduction, Michael and I continued to grow closer. 6 months later, he proposed during a weekend trip to Lake Superior, and I accepted without hesitation. I loved him deeply and believed we could navigate any family tensions together. "My parents can be a bit traditional," Michael acknowledged when I gently raised concerns about their reception to me. "But they'll come around once they know you better." Everyone does. When it came time for our families to meet, I arranged a dinner at a mid-range restaurant, hoping to find neutral ground. My parents arrived early, dressed in their Sunday best, bearing homemade pastries from my mother's kitchen, and clearly nervous about meeting the Whitmans. The evening was civil but strained. My parents made earnest efforts at conversation, asking interested questions about Richard's business and Eleanor's charity work. The Whitmans responded with polite but minimal engagement, speaking more to each other and to Michael than to my parents or me. "Your mother seems very enthusiastic," Eleanor commented afterward, managing to make enthusiasm sound like a character flaw. Our wedding 6 months later highlighted the vast differences between our families. The Whitmans invited over 200 guests, most of whom I had never met. My parents contributed their life savings to help with costs, a gesture that Eleanor dismissed as sweet but unnecessary, before proceeding to override most of my preferences in favor of what she called tradition. During the reception, I found my mother sitting alone while Eleanor held court with her friends across the room. "Are you enjoying yourself, Mum?" I asked, concerned by her uncharacteristic quietness. "Of course, sweetheart," she assured me, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Your Michael is wonderful. That's all that matters." After a honeymoon in France, a wedding gift from the Whitmans that my parents could never have afforded, Michael and I settled into a comfortable home in a neighborhood between our respective parents' areas. Michael joined his father's new medical research foundation, while I continued my work at the hospital. I made consistent efforts to bridge the gap between our families, arranging dinners and holiday gatherings where everyone could connect. My parents approached each interaction with warm optimism, bringing homemade treats and thoughtful small gifts that the Whitmans received with thinly veiled condescension. "Your mother certainly does love her crafts," Eleanor commented after receiving a hand-knitted scarf for Christmas. The scarf was cashmere, and my mother had spent months working on it. Eleanor set it aside without trying it on. Despite these tensions, Michael and I were happy in our first year of marriage. When I discovered I was pregnant 10 months after our wedding, we were ecstatic. Michael painted the nursery himself, and we spent evenings discussing names and dreams for our child's future. "This baby will bring everyone together," I predicted hopefully. Grandchildren have a way of softening the hardest hearts. My parents were overjoyed at the news, immediately offering to help in any way needed. My father started building a cradle by hand, and my mother began knitting blankets and tiny sweaters. The Whitmans responded with an expensive bassinet delivered by courier and arrangements for a professional nursery designer. As my due date approached, I sensed the coming baby had indeed softened Eleanor somewhat. She invited me for lunch occasionally, offering advice about motherhood and showing me photographs of Michael as an infant. I began to hope that perhaps my optimism about family harmony hadn't been misplaced after all. Emma Claire Whitman was born on December 15th, a perfect 7-pound baby with Michael's blue eyes and what appeared to be my wavy dark hair. Both sets of grandparents visited at the hospital, and for a brief shining moment, there was a sense of shared joy that transcended the usual tensions. "She's absolutely perfect," Eleanor declared, holding Emma with practiced ease. "She looks just like Catherine did as a baby," my mother added, beaming with pride. Eleanor's smile tightened slightly, but she made no contradictory remark. I counted this as progress and allowed myself to hope that Emma's arrival might truly mark a new chapter in our family dynamics. I didn't yet understand that what appeared to be a thawing was merely the calm before a storm that would force me to choose sides in ways I had never anticipated. The first hints of trouble emerged during Emma's christening, planned for 6 weeks after her birth. I had assumed we would hold the ceremony at the church where Michael and I were married, with a small reception afterward at our home. Eleanor had other ideas. "We've already spoken to Father Richardson at St. Mark's," she announced during a visit to see Emma. "The ceremony is set for the 30th, with a reception at our home afterward. We've engaged a photographer and caterer." I blinked in surprise. "That's very generous, Eleanor, but Michael and I haven't discussed the details yet. I was thinking of something smaller with both families equally involved." Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense. This is our first grandchild. The occasion deserves proper celebration. Besides, St. Mark's is where all Whitman babies have been christened for generations." When I discussed this with Michael later, he seemed reluctant to challenge his mother's plans. "It's important to them, Kate, and it does make sense to have it at the family church." But what about my family's involvement? My mum was hoping to bake for the reception, and Dad wanted to do readings during the ceremony. Michael hesitated. "I'm sure we can incorporate some of that. I'll talk to Mum about it." Whatever conversation happened between Michael and Eleanor resulted in minimal concessions. My father was permitted to do a brief reading, and my mother's homemade cookies were placed on a side table at the reception, largely overlooked among the elaborate catering. The guest list for the reception included dozens of the Whitmans' friends and associates, people who were strangers to me, but who Eleanor insisted needed to meet the newest Whitman. My parents knew almost no one, and spent most of the event standing awkwardly near the cookie table, making stilted conversation with whoever happened by. I noticed Eleanor leading her friends over to admire Emma, who was being passed among the Whitman relatives, rarely making her way to my parents' arms. When I finally brought Emma to my mother, Eleanor appeared almost immediately. "I think Emma needs changing," she declared, though I had changed her just 30 minutes earlier. "I'll take her upstairs." Before I could object, Emma was whisked away and my mother was left standing with empty arms and a hurt expression she quickly tried to hide. As Emma grew from newborn to infant to active baby, the pattern of exclusion became more pronounced. The Whitmans insisted on hosting most family gatherings at their home, where they controlled the guest list and agenda. They scheduled grandparent days without consulting my parents' availability, then expressed disappointment when Emma's other grandparents weren't more involved. "I've invited your parents to Emma's swimming lesson on Saturday," Eleanor mentioned casually during one visit. "Saturday morning, but they have the bakery stand at the farmer's market every Saturday. They've mentioned this several times," I replied, frustration building. "Well, I can hardly be expected to keep track of their schedule," Eleanor sniffed. "Families should make sacrifices for the children." The undercurrent of judgment was always present, subtle references to my parents' modest income, their lack of travel experience, their simple tastes. Richard would reminisce about Michael's childhood experiences at exclusive summer camps and private schools, with pointed comments about how fortunate Emma was to have similar opportunities ahead of her. Michael's response to these tensions was increasingly troubling. Initially, he would defend my parents or change the subject when his parents became too obviously condescending. But as time passed, he began to echo some of their sentiments, suggesting that my parents could make more effort to fit into the Whitman way of doing things. "Your dad could have worn a proper suit to the club brunch," he commented after one particularly uncomfortable gathering. Everyone noticed. "He was wearing his best suit," I pointed out. "The one he wore to our wedding." "Exactly my point," Michael replied, seemingly oblivious to how hurtful the comment was. The situation came to its first breaking point during Thanksgiving, when Emma was 10 months old. I had offered to host the holiday at our home, hoping neutral territory would ease tensions. Eleanor countered by insisting that tradition required Thanksgiving at the Whitman home. "Your parents are welcome, of course," she added magnanimously. The dinner was a masterclass in subtle humiliation. Eleanor seated my parents at the far end of the table, separated from Michael and me by several of the Whitmans' friends. The conversation never included topics my parents could easily join, revolving instead around country club politics and European travel destinations. When my mother offered to help in the kitchen, Eleanor declined with a tight smile. "Everything is under control, Mary. The caterers know exactly what they're doing." The final straw came during dessert, when my mother had brought her signature pumpkin pie alongside Eleanor's professionally made selection of pastries. "I didn't realize we were supposed to bring food," one of Eleanor's friends commented, eyeing my mother's pie with undisguised skepticism. "We weren't," Eleanor replied. "But Mary enjoys her little kitchen projects." My mother's face flushed with embarrassment, and I saw my father's hand tighten around hers under the table. Something inside me snapped. "Mom's pumpkin pie won the state fair 3 years running," I said, my voice carrying clearly down the length of the table. "People line up at the farmer's market every week just to buy her baked goods." She was kind enough to share her most requested dessert with us tonight. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Eleanor recovered first, offering a tight smile. "How lovely, though perhaps a bit rustic for some palates." After the guests departed, I confronted Eleanor in the kitchen, where she was giving instructions to the cleanup staff. "You embarrassed my mother deliberately today," I said quietly. Eleanor turned to me with cold eyes. "I did no such thing. If your mother felt out of place, perhaps she should consider why." "She felt out of place because you made her feel that way. You've been doing it since the day you met her." Michael entered the kitchen during this exchange, frowning at my confrontational tone. "Kate, this isn't the time." "When is the time, Michael? When they've completely pushed my parents out of Emma's life." Eleanor sighed dramatically. "No one is pushing anyone out. But surely you understand that Richard and I can provide Emma with opportunities and experiences that your parents simply cannot." Material things aren't all that matter, I insisted. My parents have love, wisdom, and values to share with Emma. Love doesn't get a child into Westfield Academy, Richard commented, joining us in the kitchen. Connections and proper upbringing do. The drive home that night was tense, with Michael defending his parents' perspective in ways that left me questioning whether he truly saw what was happening or had simply been conditioned to accept their behaviour as normal. They want what's best for Emma, he insisted. No, they want what they think is best, I corrected. And they don't believe my parents have anything valuable to contribute. As Emma's first birthday approached in December, the battle lines were drawn more clearly than ever. Eleanor announced her intention to host a lavish party at their home with a professional planner, photographer, and dozens of guests. A first birthday is a significant milestone, she declared when I suggested something simpler. Emma deserves a proper celebration. Exhausted by constant conflict and concerned about creating more tension that would eventually affect Emma, I reluctantly agreed to the Whitman-hosted party with one firm condition. My parents would be treated as equal grandparents involved in the planning and given prominence at the event. Of course, Eleanor agreed smoothly. Family is family after all. I wanted desperately to believe her, but the gnawing doubt in my stomach warned me that the worst was yet to come. I couldn't have imagined just how right that instinct would prove to be. The day before Emma's birthday party arrived with a flurry of last-minute preparations. Eleanor had engaged Minneapolis's most exclusive event planner, transforming the Whitman mansion into an elaborate winter wonderland, complete with professional decorations, a custom ice sculpture, and a menu that would have been appropriate for a corporate gala rather than a one-year-old's birthday. Remember that my parents are arriving at 3 to help set up, I reminded Michael as he prepared to take Emma to his parents' house that morning. I had an unavoidable shift at the hospital covering for a colleague with a family emergency. They don't need to help set up, Michael replied, securing Emma in her car seat. Mom has staff handling everything. That's not the point. I promised them they could be involved and your mother agreed. They want to contribute, not just show up as guests. Michael sighed but nodded. I'll make sure they're included. And please make sure your mother understands that we're having Mom's cupcakes alongside the fancy cake. Emma loves her grandma's baking. Kate, you're overthinking this, Michael said, his tone edging into impatience. It's going to be fine. Mum knows how important your parents are. I wanted to believe him, but experience had taught me to be skeptical of Eleanor's promises regarding my family. Still, I had no choice but to trust that Michael would advocate for my parents in my absence. I'll be home by 6, I said, kissing Emma's forehead and then Michael's cheek. Please answer your phone if I call. Last time you were at your parents', you went hours without checking messages. Reception can be spotty in parts of the house, he explained, not for the first time, but I'll try to stay reachable. My shift at the hospital was particularly challenging with 2 emergency admissions that required my full attention. By 4 o'clock, dark clouds had gathered and the first snowflakes began to fall. By 5, a full-blown December snowstorm was underway, with weather alerts advising against unnecessary travel. I tried calling Michael several times as conditions worsened, concerned about my parents driving to the Whitmans in the storm. Each call went straight to voicemail. Growing increasingly anxious, I tried the Whitmans' landline, which rang endlessly without answer. They're probably just busy with party preparations, my colleague suggested as I stared frustratedly at my phone, and the storm might be affecting reception. By the time my shift ended at 6, several inches of snow had accumulated and the roads were treacherous. The normally 30-minute drive to the Whitman estate took almost an hour of white-knuckled navigation through near-blizzard conditions. As I finally turned into the long driveway of the Whitman mansion, I was surprised to see my parents' modest sedan parked near the entrance, covered in a thick blanket of snow that suggested it had been there for some time. Through the swirling snow, I could make out lights blazing from every window of the house and hear the faint sounds of music and conversation. I parked beside my parents' car, noticing that the snow on their vehicle hadn't been disturbed. No one had gone back to it since it was parked. A sense of unease grew as I made my way toward the front entrance, the wind cutting through my coat. Before reaching the main door, I heard a sound from around the side of the house, what sounded like a muffled cough. Changing direction, I followed the sound to the side entrance, the one used primarily for caterers and staff. What I saw there stopped me cold. My parents were huddled together on the small covered porch, my father with his arm protectively around my mother, both of them visibly shivering. Their faces had taken on a frightening bluish tinge, and my mother's lips were nearly purple with cold. "Mom, Dad," I gasped, rushing toward them. "What are you doing out here?" My father looked up, relief washing over his face despite his obvious discomfort. "Katie, thank goodness. We've been waiting for someone to let us in." My mother explained, her voice trembling from cold. "The doorbell seems to be broken. I tried the side door and found it locked. How long have you been out here?" "We arrived around 3 like you asked," my father said, helping my mother to her feet. Eleanor answered the door and said they were in the middle of something and to wait around here. She said she'd send someone to get us in a few minutes. "That was over an hour before the snow started," my mother added quietly. The realization of what had happened hit me like a physical blow. My in-laws had deliberately left my parents standing outside in freezing temperatures for what must have been nearly 3 hours. The snow had started around 4, which meant they'd already been waiting an hour before the weather deteriorated. "Did you try calling knocking again?" I asked, although I already suspected the answer. "Many times," my father confirmed. "We called your cell, Michael's, and tried the house number. We knocked until our knuckles were sore. Eventually, we tried walking around to the front, but the gates to that part of the property were locked and the snow was getting too deep to navigate safely. We could hear the music and voices inside." My mother said, her voice small. "They must not have heard us over the sound of the party, but I knew better. There was no way Eleanor hadn't heard or seen my parents. The side entrance was visible from the kitchen windows. This had been deliberate, a calculated humiliation and potentially dangerous neglect given the freezing temperatures. "Come with me," I said, guiding them toward my car. "Let's get you warmed up first." I turned the car on full heat, wrapping them in the emergency blankets I kept in my trunk. My father's hands were so cold he couldn't hold the cup of hot coffee I'd brought from the hospital. My mother couldn't stop shivering, her normally rosy complexion alarmingly pale. "I'm going inside," I told them once the car had warmed somewhat. "Wait here, I'll come back for you." My father caught my arm. "Katie, don't make a scene. We can just go home." "No, Dad, this isn't right. You were invited guests, family, and you could have gotten seriously ill from exposure." The rage building inside me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Cold-focused and absolutely certain. This wasn't just another slight or subtle exclusion. This was cruelty that had put my parents' health at risk, and it could not stand unanswered. I approached the front door, noticing the valet attendants huddled in a tent nearby, apparently unbothered by the fact that my parents had been freezing just around the corner. The door opened before I could knock, revealing a server in formal attire. "Mrs. Whitman, welcome. The celebration is in full swing." The contrast between the frigid outdoors and the warm, glittering interior was jarring. The Whitman home had been transformed into a winter wonderland, with professional decorations, twinkling lights, and dozens of elegantly dressed guests mingling with champagne flutes in hand. A 3-piece ensemble played classical music in the corner of the grand living room. I spotted Michael immediately standing near his parents, bouncing Emma on his hip, while Eleanor showed her off to a group of admiring friends. They were laughing completely at ease, while my parents had been literally freezing outside their door. The scene crystallized something for me, a pattern of exclusion and disrespect that had been building since the day I'd entered the Whitman family. But this latest act crossed a line from snobbery into something far more sinister. As I crossed the room, conversations hushed, perhaps in response to my expression or my inappropriate attire. I was still in scrubs under my snow-covered coat, a stark contrast to the cocktail dresses and suits surrounding me. "Catherine, there you are," Eleanor called, her voice carrying the practiced warmth she reserved for public appearances. We were beginning to worry. I stopped directly in front of her, not bothering to lower my voice. That's interesting, because you didn't seem worried about my parents, who have been locked outside your house for 3 hours in freezing temperatures." A ripple of murmurs spread through the nearby guests. Eleanor's smile remained fixed, though her eyes hardened. "What are you talking about, dear? Your parents never arrived." "They've been at your side entrance since 3 o'clock, I said evenly. "Exactly when they were told to arrive. Their car is in your driveway covered in snow. They're currently in my car trying to warm up because their lips had turned blue from cold." Michael stepped forward, confusion written across his face. "Kate, that can't be right. Mom said she called them and they couldn't make it because of the storm." I turned to him, disbelief mixing with my anger. "Their car is in the driveway, Michael. They've been knocking and calling for hours. Go look for yourself." Richard Whitman moved to intervene, lowering his voice to a harsh whisper. "Catherine, this is hardly the time or place." "No, Richard, this is exactly the time and place," I interrupted loud enough for nearby guests to hear clearly. You and Eleanor deliberately left my parents standing in the cold while you threw this elaborate party. They could have developed hypothermia. My father's hands are so cold he can't even hold a cup. Eleanor's face had gone rigid, her social mask slipping to reveal the cold calculation beneath. If there's been some misunderstanding, this wasn't a misunderstanding, I cut in. You told them to wait at the side entrance. You knew exactly where they were and chose to leave them there. By now, a significant number of guests had fallen silent, watching the confrontation with uncomfortable fascination. I saw recognition dawn on several faces. These were Minneapolis's elite people who valued their reputations and social standing above almost everything. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, Richard suggested, attempting to take my elbow and guide me away from the crowd. I shook him off, turning instead to take Emma from Michael's arms. My daughter reached for me immediately, blissfully unaware of the tension surrounding her. The party's over, I announced, not to Richard or Eleanor, but to Michael. At least for us. I'm taking Emma and my parents home. Michael looked torn, glancing between me and his parents. Kate, let's not overreact. I'm sure there's an explanation. There is an explanation, I replied, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. Your parents think my family is beneath them. They always have. But leaving my elderly parents to freeze outside during a snowstorm goes beyond snobbery. It's cruel and potentially dangerous, and I won't expose Emma to people who would do something like that. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice lowered but sharp. You're making a scene over nothing. If your parents had come to the front door like proper guests, they went exactly where you told them to go, I interrupted. And you know it. I turned to leave Emma secure in my arms when Michael finally seemed to realize the severity of the situation. Wait, I'm coming with you. Eleanor grabbed his arm. Michael, don't be ridiculous. Catherine is clearly overreacting. The moment of choice was written clearly on my husband's face. His wife and child on one side, his parents and their social world on the other. To my dismay, but not my surprise, he hesitated. You should check on her parents, he said finally. Make sure they're okay. I'll join you at home later after we've sorted this out. In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity where Michael's priorities truly lay. He had chosen the comfort of his parents' approval over the clear mistreatment of mine. Don't bother, I told him quietly. You've made your choice. With that, I walked out of the Whitman mansion, my daughter in my arms, and the first seeds of a plan forming in my mind. What had happened here would not go unanswered. The Whitmans had brought this on themselves, and their social standing, the thing they valued above all else, would be the instrument of their reckoning. The drive home was silent, except for my father's occasional cough and my mother's concerned questions about his condition. Emma had fallen asleep in her car seat, oblivious to the family crisis unfolding around her. I drove carefully through the still falling snow, my mind working with unusual clarity despite the emotional turmoil. At home, I settled my parents in the guest room, bringing them extra blankets and making hot tea. My father's hands had finally regained some colour, but his persistent cough worried me. I think we should get you checked out, Dad. I said, my nurse's training overriding everything else. Exposure to cold that long can be serious, especially at your age. I'm fine, Katie, he insisted, though another coughing fit belied his claim. Humour me, I replied firmly. We'll go to the urgent care clinic as soon as you're warmed up. While my mother helped him change into dry clothes, I called the clinic to alert them we were coming, then took photos of my parents' still bluish extremities and documented their condition. Something told me this evidence might be important later. The urgent care doctor confirmed what I'd suspected. My father had developed a mild case of hypothermia and the beginning stages of bronchitis from exposure to the cold. The doctor prescribed antibiotics and documented the likely cause as extended exposure to freezing temperatures. You're lucky your daughter found you when she did, he told my parents. Another hour in those conditions could have been much more serious. I requested copies of all medical records, adding them to my growing documentation of the evening's events. By the time we returned home, Michael had arrived. He paced the living room, his face tight with what appeared to be genuine concern, mixed with defensive anger. Are they okay? He asked immediately. No thanks to your family, I replied coldly. Dad has hypothermia and bronchitis. The doctor said it could have been much worse if they'd been out there much longer. Michael ran a hand through his hair. Kate, you have to believe me. I had no idea they were outside. My mother told me she'd called them and they couldn't make it because of the weather. And you didn't think to verify that. To call them yourself, to wonder why their car was in the driveway covered in snow. I didn't go outside. I was busy with Emma and the guests. I stared at him, trying to reconcile the man I'd married with the one standing before me. Did you even once ask your mother if my parents had arrived? Did you look for them at all? His silence was answer enough. Your parents left mine outside to freeze Michael, deliberately. They answered the door, told them to wait at the side entrance, and then ignored them for hours. My parents wouldn't do that, he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. No, then explain to me how Eleanor knew exactly where they were when I confronted her. She didn't ask which door or express surprise. She immediately defended leaving them at the side entrance. Michael's shoulders sagged slightly. She said there was confusion about where they should enter. The front was for guests, the side for people helping with setup. The implication that my parents weren't considered real guests, but service personnel was not lost on me. And that justifies leaving them in freezing weather for hours, not checking on them, ignoring their calls. Of course not, Michael said quickly. But I don't think my parents realized how long they were out there, or that they couldn't get in. They knew, I said with absolute certainty. Eleanor saw them arrive from the kitchen window. She specifically told them to wait there. The side door was locked from the inside. They could hear the party going on without them. This wasn't an accident, Michael. It was deliberate cruelty. Michael's phone buzzed with an incoming call, his mother according to the screen. He hesitated, looking between me and the phone. Go ahead, I said flatly. Answer it. Let's hear what excuse she's come up with now. He put the phone on speaker. Mom, Michael, thank goodness. Is Catherine with you? Eleanor's voice came through perfectly controlled as always. Yes, she's here. You're on speaker. A brief pause. I see. Well, I wanted to express how deeply sorry we are about the unfortunate misunderstanding with Catherine's parents. Had we realized they were waiting outside, we certainly would have brought them in immediately. It wasn't a misunderstanding, I interjected. You told them specifically to wait at the side entrance, then left them there for hours in freezing weather. My father is now sick as a result. Catherine, I understand you're upset, but you're exaggerating the situation. Eleanor replied, her tone shifting to the patronizing one she often used with me. Your parents arrived at an entrance meant for caterers. When they didn't come to the main door after a reasonable time, we assumed they'd gone home because of the weather. Their car was in your driveway, I pointed out. Covered in snow, they called both your house phone and Michael's cell multiple times. They knocked until their hands were sore. The music was quite loud, Eleanor countered smoothly. And you know how unreliable cell service can be at the house. Regardless, we feel terrible about the confusion and hope your parents are recovering well. Her lack of genuine remorse fueled my determination. This wasn't confusion, Eleanor. This was deliberate. And my father's condition is documented by medical professionals, including the cause. Extended exposure to freezing temperatures while waiting outside your home. A longer pause this time. Eleanor had caught the implied threat in my words. Perhaps we should discuss this when emotions aren't running so high. We're still hosting guests after all. By all means, go back to your party, I replied. We have nothing further to discuss tonight. After Michael ended the call, he turned to me with pleading eyes. Kate, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but surely you don't believe my mother would deliberately put your parents in danger. That's exactly what I believe, I replied. She's made her feelings about my family clear from day one. The only difference is that she's finally gone too far. What does that mean? Michael asked, wariness entering his expression. It means there are consequences for treating people the way your family has treated mine. Your parents care about one thing above all else, their social standing. So that's where they'll feel the impact of their actions. Michael looked alarmed. What are you planning to do? I'm planning to tell the truth, I said simply. To everyone who was at that party tonight, to everyone in their social circle, to the boards Eleanor sits on, to the medical community your father is part of, people should know what kind of people the Whitmans really are. Kate, that's going too far. This was one incident. No, Michael, this was the culmination of years of disrespect and condescension. Your parents left mine to freeze because they thought they could get away with it. They thought my family didn't matter enough for anyone to care how they were treated. They were wrong. Over the next few days, I put my plan into action with the methodical precision I'd learned in my nursing career. I began by contacting several guests from the party who had witnessed my confrontation with Eleanor and Richard, people I knew from hospital functions who had always been kind to me. I'm not asking you to take sides. I told Dr. Larson, who served on a charitable board with Eleanor. I'm simply sharing what happened and providing documentation to support it. The medical report detailing my father's condition proved particularly powerful evidence, especially among the physicians in the Whitman's social circle. Many were genuinely disturbed by what had happened, especially given my father's age and the dangerous weather conditions. "This isn't just snobbery," Dr. Larson commented. "This borders on elder abuse." I can't imagine what Eleanor was thinking. I also reached out to local social columnists who covered Minneapolis high society people who had written glowing pieces about Eleanor's charitable works over the years. I didn't seek publicity, merely provided information when asked about the abrupt end to Emma's birthday celebration. Michael was horrified by what he saw as public humiliation of his family. "You're destroying their reputation," he accused during one heated argument. "They destroyed their own reputation," I corrected. "I'm just making sure people know the truth about who they really are." What surprised me most was how quickly the story spread through the Whitman's social circle. People who had witnessed the confrontation shared what they'd seen with others. The image of elderly grandparents left to freeze outside, while a lavish party continued inside, struck a chord even among Minneapolis's elite, where maintaining appearances was paramount. Within a week, Eleanor's position on the symphony board was under review. Two of Richard's golf partners at the country club had quietly cancelled their standing tea times. Invitations to upcoming social events mysteriously failed to arrive at the Whitman mansion. The true impact became clear when Eleanor called, her voice lacking its usual confident control. "This has gone far enough, Catherine. You've made your point." "Have I?" I replied. "Because I haven't heard a genuine apology from either you or Richard for what you did to my parents. We're sorry if there was a misunderstanding." "That's not an apology, Eleanor. That's another attempt to minimize what you did." She sighed, frustration evident. "Fine. We apologize for not ensuring your parents were properly admitted to the party. It was an oversight. An oversight that left them in freezing temperatures for hours and made my father ill," I pointed out. "And it wasn't accidental. You knew exactly where they were." "What do you want from me, Catherine?" Eleanor's voice cracked slightly, the first genuine emotion I'd heard from her in years. "I want you to admit what you did. I want a real apology to my parents, not to me, to them. And I want a commitment that this kind of behavior will never happen again. And if we do this, you'll stop this. Campaign against us." "I haven't campaigned against you, Eleanor. I've simply told the truth. But yes, if you make things right with my parents, I won't feel the need to discuss the incident further." The meeting was arranged for the following day at our home, neutral territory. My parents initially resisted, uncomfortable with confrontation and concerned about causing family discord. "We don't need to make a big deal about this, Katie," my mother insisted. "We're fine now." "It is a big deal, Mum," I replied gently. "And not just because Dad got sick. It's about respect and how family should treat each other. This needs to be addressed if we're ever going to move forward." When the Whitmans arrived, the tension was palpable. Michael hovered anxiously between the two sets of parents, clearly uncomfortable with his role in the situation. For the first time, I saw Eleanor looking genuinely uncertain, her usual poise somewhat diminished. Richard spoke first, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Robert, Mary, we want to apologize for what happened at Emma's birthday. There's no excuse for leaving you outside in those conditions." Eleanor nodded stiffly. "It was wrong of us, inexcusably wrong. We should have made sure you were properly welcomed into our home." My father, ever gracious, nodded his acceptance. "These things happen, no lasting harm done." "That's not entirely true," I interjected gently. "Dad, you were sick for days, and this wasn't an accident or oversight. I think we all need to acknowledge that." A heavy silence fell over the room. Finally, Eleanor spoke, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. "You're right. It wasn't an accident. I directed you to the service entrance deliberately and then didn't ensure you were brought inside." The admission hung in the air, its implications clear to everyone present. "Why?" my mother asked simply, her kind face genuinely puzzled. "What have we ever done to make you dislike us so much?" Eleanor seemed startled by the direct question. "I don't. It's not that I dislike you personally. It's just that we come from different worlds, different backgrounds. I thought Catherine would eventually adapt to our way of life, but she remains so attached to her origins." "You mean her family," my father clarified. "The people who raised her and love her." "Yes," Eleanor admitted reluctantly. "I suppose that's what I mean." "And you thought leaving us out in the cold, literally, would somehow change that?" My mother asked, no accusation in her tone, just genuine curiosity. Eleanor had no good answer for this, and in her silence I saw the first glimmer of genuine shame. The conversation continued for another hour, painful but necessary, as years of unspoken tensions were finally brought to light. By the end, nothing was magically resolved, but something had fundamentally shifted. The Whitmans had been forced to confront the reality of their behavior, not just toward my parents, but toward anyone they deemed beneath their social standing. And for perhaps the first time, they were experiencing the consequences of that behavior, in terms they truly understood: social standing and reputation. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor approached me directly. "I understand why you did what you did, Catherine. I don't like it, but I understand it." It wasn't forgiveness or even full acceptance, but it was acknowledgement. The first step toward whatever our family relationships might become in the future. The real surprise came from Michael, who had remained largely silent throughout the confrontation. As we prepared for bed that night, he sat heavily on the edge of our mattress. "I've been blind," he said quietly, "to what my parents were doing, to how they treated your family, to how I enabled it." I sat beside him, not touching, but present. "Yes, you have. I'm sorry, Kate. Truly sorry. I should have stood up for your parents that night and all the times before that. I don't know if you can forgive me, but I promise I'm going to do better." His words were a beginning, not an end. Trust once broken couldn't be instantly restored, but it was a start toward healing. What had been broken not just on the night of the party, but in the years of small betrayals that had preceded it. As for the Whitmans, their social rehabilitation would take time. Some friendships were permanently damaged, some social doors temporarily closed. But the greatest consequence wasn't external, but internal: the shattering of their belief that their status placed them above accountability for their actions. In making them pay for their cruelty, I hadn't sought revenge so much as justice, recognition that no family deserved to be treated as disposable, regardless of their background or bank account. The lesson was painful but necessary, not just for Eleanor and Richard, but for Michael and for me. Family loyalty, I realized, sometimes required standing firm against those who would harm the people you love, even when those causing harm are family themselves. The year following what came to be known in our family as the incident brought unexpected changes to our family dynamics. The immediate aftermath was predictably difficult, with strained interactions and careful politeness replacing the previous pattern of subtle undermining and exclusion. Eleanor and Richard maintained a certain distance, their pride wounded not just by the public exposure of their behavior, but by the genuine social consequences that followed. Several of Eleanor's closest friends quietly stepped back from their relationship, uncomfortable with the revealed character of someone they'd considered a peer. The symphony board position was quietly not renewed, and invitations to certain key social events were noticeably absent. For people whose identity was so deeply tied to their social standing, these were significant blows. Michael faced his own reckoning, caught between loyalty to his parents and the undeniable reality of their behavior. For several weeks, he seemed lost, questioning values and relationships he'd always taken for granted. "I keep thinking about all the times I dismissed your concerns," he confessed during a long walk one evening, Emma sleeping in her stroller between us. "All the times I told you that you were overreacting or misinterpreting my parents' intentions. Why did you do that?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. He considered the question carefully. "I think I needed to believe they were better than they were, that the family I came from was worthy of the pride I felt in it. Acknowledging how they treated your parents meant acknowledging something ugly at the core of how I was raised." This insight marked a turning point for Michael. Over the following months, he began the difficult work of examining his own inherited biases and privileges, recognizing patterns of behavior he'd absorbed without question. He started spending more time with my parents, getting to know them as individuals rather than extensions of me. My father, ever the teacher, took Michael fishing and shared stories of his years educating generations of Minneapolis students. My mother taught him to bake her famous cinnamon rolls, laughing at his initial clumsiness in the kitchen. Slowly, Michael began to see what I had always known, that wealth and status were poor measures of a person's true value. The most significant change came 3 months after the incident, when my father developed pneumonia as a lingering complication of the bronchitis he'd contracted that snowy night. His hospitalization was brief but frightening, and I was surprised one afternoon to find Richard Whitman standing awkwardly in the hospital corridor outside my father's room. "Is he allowed visitors?" Richard asked, clutching what appeared to be a rare book on astronomy, my father's lifelong passion. "He is," I replied cautiously, "though I'm not sure he's expecting you." Richard nodded, uncharacteristically hesitant. "I understand. I can leave this and go. Something in his demeanor stopped me from dismissing him. Why are you here, Richard? He met my eyes directly for perhaps the first time since I'd known him. Because I was wrong. About a great many things, but especially about your father. When I heard he was ill, possibly as a continuing result of what happened at our home, I couldn't ignore my part in that. I studied him for a moment, searching for signs of insincerity or manipulation. Finding none, I nodded toward the door. He'll be glad for the company. He gets bored easily. What transpired during that visit remained largely between the two men, but my father later told me that Richard had offered a genuine apology man to man without excuses or qualifications. He's not so bad when you get him away from all that society nonsense, my father commented. Actually knows quite a bit about astrophysics. This unexpected connection between the two men opened a small door toward healing. Richard began occasionally visiting my father for coffee, their conversations ranging from science to philosophy to the merits of various fishing techniques. It wasn't friendship exactly, not yet, but it was respect, something that had been notably absent before. Eleanor's journey was slower and more complicated. Her identity had been so thoroughly built around social status and appearances that she struggled to find new footing. Our interactions remained formal and somewhat strained, but I noticed small efforts, remembering my mother's birthday with an appropriate card, asking after my father's health, with what seemed like genuine concern. 6 months after the incident, she requested a meeting with me alone. We met at a neutral cafe, both of us stiff and uncertain. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she began after our coffee arrived, about the kind of person I've been, the kind of grandmother I want to be to Emma. I waited, allowing her the space to continue. I was raised to believe that certain things mattered above all else. Appearances, connections, maintaining a particular social position. I never questioned those values until I was forced to see how they had shaped my behavior toward your parents. And what did you see? I prompted when she paused. Cruelty. She admitted the word clearly difficult for her. Not just in leaving them outside that night, but in 100 small ways over the years. I convinced myself it was about protecting our family's standing, but the truth is uglier than that, which is, I was protecting myself, my sense of superiority, the belief that I was somehow better than others because of accidents of birth and circumstance. She took a shaky breath. I don't expect you to forgive me, Catherine, but I want you to know that I'm trying to change for Emma's sake, if nothing else. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was a real one, perhaps the first truly genuine interaction we'd ever had. I didn't offer immediate forgiveness or false assurances that all was well, but I did acknowledge her effort. Change takes time, I said finally, and it's demonstrated through actions, not just words, but I appreciate your honesty. As Emma's second birthday approached, the question of how to celebrate became a test of how far our families had come. The previous year's disaster had left everyone wary of another gathering, but isolating Emma from either set of grandparents wasn't a solution I wanted. After much discussion with Michael, I proposed a modest celebration at my parents' home, a deliberate choice to demonstrate that grand settings and elaborate decorations weren't necessary for meaningful family occasions. My parents would love to host, I told Michael, but I understand if yours aren't comfortable with that. To my surprise, Michael didn't hesitate. I think it's a great idea, and my parents will come even if it's difficult for them. They need to experience life outside their bubble. The party itself was a study in contrast to the previous year's event. My mother baked a simple birthday cake decorated with Emma's favourite animals. My father hung paper streamers and balloons around their modest living room. The guest list included only family and a few close friends, with no professional photographers or caterers in sight. When the Whitmans arrived, I watched Eleanor take in the homemade decorations and modest setting with an expression I couldn't quite read. She'd dressed more simply than usual, clearly making an effort not to appear ostentatious, though the single strand of pearls at her throat probably cost more than my parents' monthly mortgage payment. "Thank you for having us," she said to my mother, presenting a tasteful gift for Emma. "Your home is very welcoming." It wasn't effusive praise, but from Eleanor, it represented significant effort. My mother, eternally gracious, accepted the comment with a genuine smile. "We're glad you could come. Family should be together for important days." The party progressed with surprising ease, the adults maintaining civil conversation, while Emma delighted in being the centre of attention. When my mother brought out the cake, slightly lopsided, but made with love, I held my breath, half expecting some subtle commentary from Eleanor about professional bakers. Instead, After Emma had enthusiastically smeared frosting across her face, Eleanor turned to my mother with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. "Did you make this yourself? Emma clearly loves it." "Family recipe," my mother confirmed. "Nothing fancy, but kids seem to enjoy it." "It's delicious," Richard commented, accepting a second slice. "Reminds me of my grandmother's baking before everything became about presentation rather than taste." This small exchange marked another tiny step forward, acknowledgement that value existed outside the Whitmans' narrow definition of what mattered. As the seasons changed and Emma grew from toddler to preschooler, our family relationships continued their slow, imperfect healing. There were setbacks and difficult moments, old habits that resurfaced and required addressing, but the general trajectory was towards something healthier than what had come before. Michael's transformation was perhaps the most complete. Free from the constant pressure to uphold his family's expectations, he developed a genuine appreciation for my parents and the values they represented. He defended them fiercely when necessary and made a point of including them in Emma's life in meaningful ways. "I want her to understand that worth isn't measured by bank accounts or social connections," he told me one evening as we watched Emma reading a book to her teddy bear. "I want her to have what you had growing up, unconditional love and the knowledge that character matters more than status." When I discovered I was pregnant with our second child just after Emma's third birthday, the news was met with joy from both sets of grandparents. My mother immediately began knitting baby blankets, while Eleanor offered practical support in the form of recommendations for the best prenatal care. The birth of our son, Robert Michael Whitman, named for both grandfathers, provided another opportunity for family bonding. In the hospital room after his arrival, I witnessed something I would have thought impossible 3 years earlier. Richard and my father standing side by side at the nursery window, both wearing expressions of identical pride and wonder. "Handsome boy," my father commented. "Has Catherine's determination in his face already?" "And Michael's eyes," Richard agreed. "He'll be keeping you both busy, I expect." Tone. It wasn't a perfect resolution to years of tension and hurt. Eleanor still occasionally made comments that revealed her ingrained sense of superiority. Richard sometimes lapsed into condescension when discussing financial matters, but these moments were now exceptions rather than the rule, and they were met with gentle correction rather than silent acceptance. The revenge I had orchestrated in the aftermath of finding my parents locked out in the snow had achieved its purpose. Not destruction, but transformation. By holding the Whitmans accountable in terms they understood, I had forced a reckoning that might otherwise never have occurred. More importantly, I had demonstrated to my children through actions rather than words that family loyalty meant standing up for those you love, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable. That respect wasn't something bestowed based on wealth or status, but a basic human right that everyone deserved. "Do you regret it?" Michael asked me one evening 3 years after the incident, as we watched both sets of grandparents playing with our children in the backyard of our new home, a house we'd chosen specifically because it was equidistant between our parents' neighborhoods. "Regret what?" I asked, though I knew what he meant. Going public with what my parents did, forcing them to face consequences in front of their social circle. I considered the question carefully, watching Eleanor show Emma how to arrange flowers in a small vase while my father helped Robert examine a caterpillar with a magnifying glass. The scene before me would have been unimaginable before that snowy night. "No," I said finally, "I don't regret it. Your parents needed to experience consequences for their actions to understand their impact. Words alone wouldn't have been enough." Michael nodded slowly. "I think you're right. It was painful for all of us, but necessary. They're better people for it. We all are." As I watched our blended, imperfect family interact with genuine care and respect, I realized that the true victory wasn't in making the Whitmans pay for their cruelty, but in creating space for something better to grow from the ashes of what had been destroyed. The journey hadn't been easy, and it wasn't complete. There would always be moments of tension, old wounds that occasionally reopened differences in values and perspectives that required navigation. But we were moving forward together, learning from past mistakes rather than repeating them. In the end, the greatest revenge against cruelty wasn't more cruelty, but the creation of something kinder, more just, and more genuinely connected than what had existed before. And that was a victory worth celebrating. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who treated someone you love poorly? How did you handle the situation? Share your experience in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need encouragement in setting boundaries with difficult family members. Thank you for being part of this journey with me, and remember that sometimes the most powerful response to unkindness is standing firm in your values, rather than compromising them for the sake of false peace. Your family stories matter, and I'd love to hear how you've navigated similar challenges in your own life.